Hey everyone, it is E. Today we are back reviewing more Disney Channel original movies. In this video, we're going to be covering the work of three legendary DCOM actors, Ryan Merriman, Andrew Lawrence, and Brandon Baker, who you may know better as Johnny Kapahala. The first movie I'm going to be reviewing is a Ryan Merriman movie. He's not the protagonist in this movie, but he's kind of the love interest. The movie is called A Ring of Endless Light, and is probably one of the lesser known, more obscure DCOMs. But it's so far one of my favorites that I've seen. For first thing, it's a really serene and beautiful movie. The island that the movie is set on is very peaceful and pretty. And it's poignant in a way that a lot of DCOMs aren't. The theme is the false dichotomy between science and religion, or science and the arts. And that's a really unexpected discussion for a DCOM movie. And there's also kind of this idea that there is merit to the unexplained. So it's, to me, a much better moral than the typical be yourself message of other DCOMs. And it's a lot more thoughtful. There's a love triangle in the movie, and it's a thoroughly enjoyable love triangle. There's not a lot of, awkward drama. The boys that she is kind of considering both challenge her in different ways, and she challenges them as well. The choice between the boys isn't obvious like it usually is in a DCOM. Both of the guys that she's interested are really good guys. Her grandpa, who plays a big role in this movie, has really cool, crazy eyebrows. The whole part of this movie, like I said, you're probably not familiar with it, it's kind of about animal rights. It's about marine life and dolphins particularly. And our main character, the female main character, she can communicate with the dolphins. And that is kind of weird, and they never explain it, but that's kind of okay. I thought that this movie would be stupid when I learned that it was about a girl who communicates with dolphins, but really it was, a beautiful and touching movie. So the setting and the theme more than make up for the weird dolphin communication thing. So for this one, I give the story a 4 out of 5, the acting gets a 4 out of 5, the lesson gets a 5 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. So overall, this is definitely one of the better DCOMs I have seen. Next of Ryan Merriman's movies, we will talk about Smart House. So the thing about Smart House is I'm genuinely surprised at how well this movie has held up over the years. The thing which dates Smart House the most is the fact that Ben, who Ryan Merriman plays, that his use of the internet ties up the phone line, which, that doesn't happen anymore. But otherwise, the fake science in this movie isn't as egregious as it is in other DCOMs. Pat, who is the Smart House's AI, she's a little bit too advanced, but it's not that far of a reach. In this day and age, the way the AI works, it learns through communication and through observing interactions between people. So I think a lot of people, myself included, have interacted with an AI in some form or fashion, and even as we're interacting with them, sometimes it can seem like the AI has a sense of humor or a personality, or that it cares for you. And obviously it doesn't, because it's a robot, but because it has observed, it has learned how to mimic those types of interactions. And Pat, the AI in Smart House, basically does this by watching old mid-century type of sitcoms, which Ben makes her watch to learn how to be a better mother. And so she learns from the interactions on the TV shows that she's watched, and then she winds up portraying the personalities of those old school moms. And it's actually pretty realistic to how AIs work. Obviously, it's a little bit more fine-tuned in the movie than it is in real life, but it's actually pretty good. At the heart of this movie, it's really about a boy who's struggling to cope with the loss of his mother, even though it happened a while ago. So he's kind of still grieving that loss. And it's pretty touching. The lesson is not that he needs to get over it, but it's about how to move on from that loss while still treasuring, those old memories. As far as the special effects go, they're pretty convincing. Some of the green screen work is a little bit cheesy, but that's kind of to be expected, and it's really not that bad or distracting. And the acting is pretty good. I wouldn't say that there are well-known actors in Smart House, but there are actors in Smart House that I recognize from other like TV shows and movies, so the acting is pretty good. So overall, I give Smart House the story 4 out of 5. The acting gets a 5 out of 5. The lesson gets a 3 out of 5. It's a good lesson, but they didn't deliver it very well. And then for enjoyability, it actually gets a 5 out of 5. So it's a pretty good one. And then next up, and the final Ryan Merriman DCOM we'll be talking about, is Luck of the Irish. This movie definitely did not age as well as Smart House. It is oddly like super patriotic, and it's odd, a little bit uncomfortable, because the movie keeps circling back and talking about how the Irish were oppressed. Meanwhile, Kyle, who is the main character, he has a black friend whose people are still being oppressed in this day and age. So I don't know, the movie feels a little bit insensitive to continuously talk about the oppression of the Irish in the United States, while there are other ethnicities represented in this film that still face very outward oppression today. That being said, most of the effects in the movie were pretty good, for making his mom look really little and stuff like that, because she's a leprechaun. But at the end, the villain of the movie, he's like a rival leprechaun, I guess. He shrinks down to his leprechaun size, and we actually like see him shrinking, unlike his mom, who like shrinks off screen. And watching the villain shrink was really, really bad and cheesy. Also, the beginning of the movie doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, his parents don't want him to worry about his leprechaunism, so they like hide the fact that they're Irish from him. But like, just because you're Irish, you wouldn't like assume that you're a leprechaun. Like, you could tell your kid that you're Irish without telling him he's a leprechaun. So really, like, the movie doesn't make a ton of sense. So for this one, I give the story a 3 out of 5. The lesson gets a 5 out of 5, because the lesson is to be proud of your heritage and hard work. Acting gets a 4 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. That is the last Ryan Merriman DCOM I'll talk about. I chose to talk about Ring of Endless Life first, even though that's the last one that he was in chronologically, because that is what I'm doing the fan art for. It's kind of hard to tell because it's just a beach scene, so maybe you thought this was fan art for Johnny Tsunami, but it is not. This is for A Ring of Endless Light. And speaking of Johnny Tsunami, let's talk about that movie next. Okay, so Johnny Tsunami's a bit of a doozy. This is actually my second time recording a review for it because my first audio recording was way too long, so let's see if I can do this a little bit quicker. So first things first, it was kind of interesting to see a flip of a formula. We're used to seeing kind of hot dads, but in this movie we kind of got a hot grandpa. Grandpa's got this long flowing hair, and he's like this total cool surf bum. Meanwhile, Johnny's dad is kind of like this corporate drone type. He gave up surfing to pursue, like, I guess, more serious career options and stuff like that. And he loves to crush Johnny's dreams. Johnny wants to be a professional surfer like his grandpa, and his dad just crushes his dreams at way too young of an age. Johnny's friends who live on the island with him in Hawaii, I think their names are Jake and Eddie. They're terrible actors. Like, whoever played them did not do a good job. Like, every single line they deliver is super cheesy when they say it. It sounds like they're reading off of a teleprompter or something. But speaking back on the relationship between Johnny's dad and his grandpa, Johnny's dad thinks that his dad is a lunatic. In the movie, they call him Johnny T. So, yeah, Johnny's dad, Pete, thinks that Johnny T is a lunatic, but yet he named his son after him. So that doesn't really make a ton of sense. And also, it doesn't really make a ton of sense that he thinks his dad's crazy, because while his dad may not be rich, his dad lives in Hawaii, basically on the beach. He has somewhere to live, and he's happy. So to me, it sounds like Johnny T is living the good life. So I don't know why he's so upset with the idea of his son turning out like him. So anyway, Johnny's dad gets a job in Vermont, so they move to the mainland, and Johnny's obviously miserable because he's not able to surf and stuff. But when he gets there, there's already like snowboarding posters hanging up in Johnny's room. So it's like, who put those there? There's a lot of stuff in this movie that's kind of like that. It's just like, why? This doesn't make any sense. The body double or the stunt double that used for Johnny's skiing and snowboarding scene, it was terrible. The guy did not look like Brandon Baker at all. For one thing, Brandon Baker, obviously he's to look like a Hawaiian. He has tan skin, dark hair, dark eyes, but the guy they got to do his body double stunt work has like this very like chiseled, like fair-skinned face. So it's like when he's snowboarding in and skiing, apparently he's a white guy, but outside of that, he's Hawaiian. I will say I was impressed with all of these like weird inconsistencies and stuff. I thought for sure that they would screw up the time zones, but they didn't. When Johnny calls his grandpa, it's evening in Vermont, but it's morning or afternoon in Hawaii. So that actually checks out. So that I was impressed with that. At one point, Johnny's friend Sam takes him to go snowboarding with him, and the guy who runs the snowboard shop just gives Johnny everything for free. So I have no idea how Johnny was just able to get a bunch of free snowboarding gear, but he was. Another thing I should say that doesn't make sense about the movie is that Johnny and the private school kids get in a fight up on the mountain, and Johnny winds up getting in trouble for that at school the next day. Where I'm from, stuff that happens outside of school, like you don't get in trouble for it at school, but Johnny's like threatened with suspension over fighting outside of school. That doesn't make a ton of sense. And after this fight occurs, Johnny's dad kind of unravels even further. He kind of encourages his son to be a classist because Johnny goes to the private school, but he hangs out with the public school kids, and his dad's like, I don't think you should hang out with the public school kids anymore. It's better for your future if you hang out with the other rich kids. And it's like, yikes, why are you such a jerk? Another point that doesn't make sense, this is like the most exciting part of the movie. Johnny and Sam run away to Hawaii, and to do this they sneak onto like a military airplane that is apparently like delivering stuff to Hawaii. We don't get to see any of them sneaking onto the plane, so we have no idea how this happens. When they go back to Vermont, Johnny's grandfather comes with them, and he magically not only knows how to drive in the snow, but also knows how to snowboard. This is never explained. Johnny's grandpa leads us to believe he's never been off of the island, so I have no idea in the world how he knows how to handle snow. But a good point in this movie, and probably the highlight of this movie, is that Johnny's dad does eventually apologize to him, and that's really refreshing to see, and it's good for kids to see that parents should apologize to their children when they're in the wrong. So, Johnny Tsunami, I give the story a 2 out of 5 because a lot of stuff happens with no explanation. The acting is also pretty bad, gets a 2 out of 5. The lesson gets a 5 out of 5 because the lesson is like you should do what you want in life and you can't make your kids do things they don't want to do. And then for enjoyability, it's a 3 out of 5. So the first thing I noticed when I watched Johnny Kapahala Back on Board was that they recast Johnny's friend Sam. And that's fine. 8 years had passed, and so they're basically adults now. Both Johnny and Sam, they're supposed to be teenagers, but in real life, like Brandon Baker, who played Johnny, was like 22. But they recast Sam, and that would be totally fine. But the kid that they recast to play Sam has a totally different skin tone than the original Sam. Sam is black. In Johnny Kapahala Back on Board, Sam is still black, but when you look at his complexion, he looks is lighter skinned, like he's light skinned. And at first I was like, who is this? And then I realized, oh, that's supposed to be his friend from middle school, even though he looks totally different. So that was an odd choice. So this movie is about Johnny going back to Hawaii for his grandpa's wedding. His grandpa's marrying this younger woman who has a kid named Chris who's like 12. So Johnny is almost an adult, and his new uncle is going to be a 12-year-old boy. Chris wants to be part of this like dirt boarding gang called the Dirt Devils or something like that, and they're all like teenagers who are like Johnny's age. So like I said, he's 22 in real life, but I think he's supposed to be playing like a 16 or 17-year-old in this movie. So Chris is really trying to impress these basically almost grown adult people, And, like, they're kind of bullying him and, like, gaslighting him and, like, leading him on to make him think that they'll accept him into this dirtboarding gang or crew or whatever. And it's like, why are grown adults bullying a little kid? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But one positive note is that the Jonas Brothers song Hold On is in the soundtrack, and that's really cool. The movie kind of does drag on a bit, though. And there's kind of a lot going on that seems unrelated. The movie's kind of supposed to be about Johnny's grandpa's wedding and about this new uncle, quote unquote, that he has. But then, like, really close to the end of the movie, it randomly becomes about a business competition between his grandpa's shop and the Dirt Devil, like, dirtboard shop across the street. And it's kind of like the seeds of this conflict should have been sown way earlier on in the movie, but it's like totally random at the end. Also, it's kind of cheesy. There's like this dirt boarding competition at the end between Johnny and the owner of the dirt board store, and whoever wins, like, whatever, wins the business. That's a oversimplification of things, but whatever. And they, like, slapped a bunch of random filters and effects on during the dirtboard race, and it looks like they just stuck it in iMovie or something. It's pretty bad. And also, just like in Johnny Tsunami, they got another bad stunt double for Johnny's boarding sequences. But overall, I would say the sequel is much better than the original, even though the plot's a little sloppy. At least it makes sense, and there's not a bunch of randomly unexplained things. And also, Hawaii is a way more interesting setting than Vermont. It's much more beautiful, and they have way cooler set pieces and stuff like that. But anyway, this story gets a 3 out of 5. The acting gets a 4 out of 5. The lesson, which is just like family, whatever, gets a 2 out of 5. And enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. So those are the 2 Johnny Tsunami movies. Alright, and our final legendary DCOM actor that we're going to be talking about is Andrew Lawrence. You may recognize his brother Matthew Lawrence from Boy Meets World. He plays Jack. And his other brother, Joey Lawrence, is also in some of these DCOM movies with him. The first one is Horse Sense. So this stars Andrew Lawrence as Tommy, and then it has his older brother, Joey Lawrence, playing his cousin. So this story is more about the cousin than it is about Andrew Lawrence as Tommy, but it's kind of the story about a selfish, rich jerk learning to think of others' feelings and not just his own. The acting and performance by Joey Lawrence, which his name is Michael in the movie, it's actually a pretty compelling performance, even though, like, his rich guy wardrobe was totally terrible. It's kind of a Lifetime movie plot about, like, saving the ranch. You've got this city slicker who goes out to the country to learn about hard work. The only thing that makes it not like a Lifetime or Hallmark movie is that there's no love interest in it. But if there was a love interest for Michael out on the ranch, then this would be a total Hallmark movie. The beginning of the movie drags on and is really depressing because Tommy goes out to LA to spend time with Michael in the city, and he's getting totally ignored. And, like, Michael keeps promising that he'll take him to Disneyland, and he never does. And that is so sad. Like, I relate to the sadness because I want to go to Disneyland and can't go. And Tommy was, like, right there in the same city as Disneyland and didn't get to go. That's heartbreaking and sad to watch. Overall, the movie is kind of boring. There's nothing really special about it. Like I said, Joey Lawrence's performance as Michael is the best part about it. It's not really even cheesy enough to be cute. It's not good enough to be memorable. But I will say at least the plot makes sense. A lot of DCOMs that are like this, the plot also doesn't make sense. But because it's not very fun, I give the story a 3 out of 5. The enjoyability gets a 3 out of 5. The lesson, selfish jerk learning to care about others, gets a 5 out of 5. And the acting gets a 5 out of 5. The next Andrew Lawrence DCOM is Jumping Ship. It is kind of a sequel to Horse Sense. But they really don't have very much, if anything, to do with each other. As a sequel, it's pointless. Horse Sense, we're supposed to believe that Michael has kind of learned his lesson about hard work and all that. at the end of the movie, he says he's going to go work on the ranch with Tommy and his aunt. So we're kind of like at the end of Horse Sense, we're left to believe, okay, he has learned the value of hard work and he's going to help out on the ranch. He's not a jerk anymore. But this movie kind of reverts him right back to his old selfish ways. Apparently, it's not the case that he was going to go work on the ranch, or he only worked there for like a summer or something. The whole conflict of the movie derives from Michael's materialism and this unexplained hatred he has for this guy named Jake, who is played by Matthew Lawrence. Now, Matthew Lawrence is supposed to be a stranger, basically, to Tommy and Michael, but he looks just like them, so it's a little bit unrealistic. This guy, who's very clearly a relative, like in real life, they look related. It's kind of unrealistic that he's just supposed to be this random guy on like a pontoon boat in Australia. So the movie is about like Michael and Tommy are supposed to be going on this like luxury vacation together, and they're supposed to be taking like a ferry boat over to the resort. The ferry boat is owned by this guy named Jake, who is played by their real life brother. And while they're on this boat, they get chased down by pirates who target Michael because he's such a flashy city slicker who dresses super nice, and so they want to like hold him hostage for ransom money or something like that. But because they're being chased by pirates, they have to abandon ship, and like they hide out on this island. Nothing happens. At the end, they manage to best the pirates and blah 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 blah. The plot, again, it makes sense, but it's so simple, it's boring, and nothing really happens in the movie. And for no reason, Michael, he's totally materialistic. That's problem one. And number two, he just randomly hates the guy who owns the like boat that was supposed to ferry them to the resort. Like, and because he's materialistic and hates this guy, like that's where the whole conflict comes from. And both of those issues don't make any sense. He shouldn't be materialistic anymore because of the events that happened in the prequel, and he shouldn't hate the guy who owns the ferry boat because he really has no reason to. Overall, the movie is kind of forgettable. The story gets a 1 out of 5 because it's boring, the acting gets a 1 out of 5, the lesson gets a 1 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 1 out of 5. It's not the worst movie ever, but because I feel like we're basically just watching the movie Horse Sense again, except for instead of it being about a ranch, it's being about like a deserted island, like it was pointless. The next Andrew Lawrence movie that we'll be discussing is The Other Me, which is actually pretty decent. So if you've seen any of Andrew Lawrence's DCOMs, you've probably seen The Other Me. I feel like I remember this movie getting a lot of play on Disney Channel when I was a kid. This movie, watching it back as an adult, it actually made me laugh out loud on a couple of occasions. Andrew Lawrence gives a really good performance in this movie. He's playing himself and his clone. He plays a kid named Will who wants to do a science project for school because he's like getting really bad grades in science and he needs at least a B on his project to get a D in the class to pass it. So he orders basically sea monkeys to do as a science project, which is a bad idea anyway. But the people who make the sea monkeys, I think in the movie they're called ocean pups or something like that, but the people who make that product they're making is basically a front for them trying to do this other thing, which is hyper cloning. It's super bad fake science, okay? Smart House had good fake science. The Other Me has bad fake science. Through a series of goofy events, Will orders these ocean pups or sea monkeys or whatever they are, and it's got some of the hypercloning solution in it, and he manages to clone himself. And like I said, he gives a really good performance as both himself and the clone. One thing that's kind of silly is when the clone first emerges from the sea monkey solution in Will's bathroom, we're supposed to believe he's naked because Will looks at him and tells him, "Put this towel on, wrap it around your waist." But, like, the movie is very poorly made. Like, not talking about the story, like, the writing. I'm talking about, like, the actual camera work and stuff like that. They show him, it's supposed to just be from the waist up, but in several shots, when he has just emerged from the solution, we can tell that he's not naked. We can see the top of his jeans. And so it's kind of silly that he asked him to wrap a towel around himself, because we've all seen that he's already apparently wearing jeans. He came out into the world wearing jeans. It's really, 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 really bad. And they did some really bad body double work, which you can probably find in clips on YouTube of like arms not being where they're supposed to be and stuff like that. The plot is actually pretty interesting. You know, in the story, like, the lesson is that fear holds you back from being your best self. The clone wasn't afraid of, like, other people's judgment and, you know, making a fool of himself, or he wasn't afraid of failing. And so he was able to do all of the things that he wanted to do, and he did them well. What doesn't make sense about this movie, aside from the fact that he exists at all, is that he comes out, like, he emerges into existence already knowing how to speak and read with no explanation. Like, they didn't tell us at all how he is already capable of reading. Maybe we're implicitly supposed to understand that he comes out with all of the knowledge that Will has already, since he's Will's clone, which I guess, based on this type of cloning, like, he's exactly the same age as Will. Like, it's not like he came out as a baby. I guess it would make sense that he would come out with all of the same knowledge and understanding that Will has, but then at the same time, Will has to teach him several things, like what burping is. So, I don't know. That doesn't make a ton of sense. The villains of this movie are really good and funny. The love story, it's a very, very small element of this movie, but the love story is really cute. And I like the emphasis on family. So overall, I would say I actually pretty well liked The Other Me, even though it was silly and a lot of stuff didn't make a ton of sense. So for the story, I give it 3 out of 5, and it loses points for the fake science not being explained very well. The acting gets a 4 out of 5. The lesson gets a 5 out of 5. And enjoyability gets a 5 out of 5. So it's a good one. Now, the last Andrew Lawrence movie we'll be talking about, and the last movie we'll be talking about in this episode, is called Going to the Mat. This one has Wayne Brady in it. So, you may know him from Whose Line Is It Anyway? Wayne Brady is actually a pretty well-known celebrity, a pretty well-known actor. So it's cool to see him in it. So that kind of sets me up kind of with high expectations for the movie. And I would say for the most part, those expectations were met. It's cool because this movie is about Andrew Lawrence. He's playing a blind kid, and you kind of expect that you should feel sorry for the blind kid, you know, because he's blind, but they made him out to be such a butthole that it's really not possible to be sympathetic to him. So this, you know, journey that he's on isn't about him believing in himself as a blind person. The story's actually about him humbling himself, and it's a really interesting take on a story that includes disability. I just was really impressed by their handling of his blindness and us, you know, showing us that, you know, people with disabilities can have the same, like, character flaws as anybody else can. The love interest is cute. She makes him a better person, which is more satisfying than just, like, falling in love. They're, like, friends first, and their friendship kind of evolves into this, like, sort of a love story. There's only, like, 2 issues that I have with this plot. It's about him joining a wrestling team because he wants to, I guess, fit in at school. Like, music isn't cool, and that is his thing. Sports are cool, so he wants to find a sport to do. So, he joins the wrestling team. This other kid on the wrestling team named John has to lose weight in order to stay in his weight class. But then the guy that he's wrestling against after he lost all that weight is clearly larger than him. Like, there's no way that the guy he's wrestling weighs less than him. So it doesn't make sense that he had to lose weight to be in that weight class when the guy he's wrestling against is clearly bigger and beefier. And the only other issue I have is that, like, there's kind of this blind person cliche of, like, feeling up a person's face to, like, get an idea of what they look like. From everything I've heard of, like, real life blind people, they don't do that, so that's a little bit cheesy. To be honest, the movie is a little bit too long and has bad pacing, but Andrew Lawrence was really, really cute in this movie, which was surprising because he kind of was a goofy looking kid. Like, he wasn't ugly, but he was kind of goofy looking, and then in this movie, like, this is him several years later, he looks pretty good. So for the story, I give it a 4 out of 5. The acting gets a 5 out of 5. The lesson gets a 4 out of 5. And the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. So that is it for our Legendary DCOM Actor edition of Every DCOM Ranked. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and let me know what movie you're looking forward to me reviewing. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes of this series. Have a great day. Bye-bye.